Sorry. Yeah, so my name is Aditya. I'm the co-founder of a company called Kisan Network. Very simply put, we help farmers across the country sell their crops directly at a more of a wholesale level. We've been operational for approximately 4 years now and present in different states across the country, headquartered here in Gurgaon, and look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Great. Karthik?
Hi, my name is Karthik. I run a company called Waycool Foods. We're a soil to sale supply chain company that handles fresh produce, staples, and dairy. We're headquartered in Chennai and we're operational primarily in southern India.
Okay, welcome, Karthik. Nishant, over to you.
Yeah, this is Nishchint Bhatia. I had agriculture supply chain for PepsiCo for Africa, Middle East, and South Asia. I've been in agriculture industry for all my life, 25 years plus. First 12 years in the input side with Monsanto, and last 13 years with PepsiCo. So I started with PepsiCo India, was handling their contract farming and supply chain. And now I'm in Dubai right now.
Okay. Ram?
Hi, I represent Intelo Labs. We do quality assessment of food commodities using image analysis and artificial intelligence.
Welcome, Ram. And Rikin?
Hey, I'm Rikin Gandhi, based in Bangalore, co-founder of Loop, which is a shared transportation service for farmers' fresh fruit and vegetable produce to share truckloads and route produce to mandis and collection centers of retailers, operational in Karnataka and Bihar.
Okay. Varun, over to you.
Hi, everyone. This is Varun Khurana. I run a company called Crow Farm. It's we are basically building a digitized supply chain for fresh, focused on fruits and vegetables. The supply chain is, designed for speed so that, you maintain the freshness of the produce. So we procure from the farm gate at one end, and at the other end, we serve small and medium businesses and consumers. And we are primarily live in Delhi NCR. Our sourcing is pan-India. We move about 50 to 60 tons every day through our system.
Okay, great. And Vasu?
Yeah. Hi, Vasu, one of the co-founders of Ninja Card. We're based out of Bangalore. We also do the agri supply chain piece where we sort of buy from the farmer and then deliver to the retailers and restaurants. We are operational in about 7 major cities across India. Yeah.
Great. Welcome, everybody. And a quick word about myself. My name is Raman. I'm based out of Gurgaon. Spent first 15 years of my career with Hindustan Lever. And then next 7 years building Bharti's Feel Fresh Foods, one of the earliest startups in fresh produce. Believe it or not, we had $50 million of equity fund available in 2004-05. So still relish those days of good funding. Welcome to this Ag Clinic of Think Ag. The way we're going to run it, and I think we're within our schedule right now. So next 50 minutes, we'll talk about the 4 or 5 different themes that we've picked up. And along the way, request all the participants to keep typing in their queries. And some have already done that at the time of registration, which is great. My colleague Ritu would pick up those and also some of the issues that are coming up from the conversation. And then we will leave the last half an hour for picking up those questions and discussing around those. The idea is to build deeper discussions as we move along, and hopefully there'll be greater collaboration among different people on this platform. Yeah. So just picking up, I'm going to start with Nishant. Nishant, you've been at food and agriculture businesses and also supply chain for a large player like PepsiCo. What have you seen as the evolution of tech and digital tools in development of supply chains and procurement operations?
I can start with, say, our PepsiCo's experiences. And I think PepsiCo started, and I'll be focusing more on India this time. So since this is an India-specific discussion, correct?
But if there are
And you're on mute again.
You're on mute.
Sorry, if there are good international examples that you'd like to share, that will be good.
Okay. I mean, try to be focusing more towards India, but like touch upon other international examples or experiences as well. So when PepsiCo entered India in 1989 through its foods businesses, we actually had to establish a supply chain for our brand Lay's at that time. I mean, that is our biggest brand global. Today, it's approximately $15 billion brand, or rather $20 billion brand. Uh, so, uh, so we actually we said, I mean, on the face of it, it looked like yes, India grows a lot of potatoes, but there were not too many processing varieties in the country. Farmers, when we look at the profile, they were most of them were smallholders. And especially in the heartland, Indo-Gangetic heartland, UP, Bihar, and Bengal, where like 75% of potatoes grow. They were all smaller farmers. So there was quantity available, but all the processing needs which are required by a company for a quality production, those were to be evaluated and uplifted. So it started with the varieties. We started working with the CPRI and also started bringing in our own varieties, and then started even producing our own seeds in Punjab. I think the hallmark of our program was we started a contract farming program in Punjab, and then and today our biggest one is in West Bengal. If I just give you a number, we directly deal with close to 27,000 farmers. I mean, we have those many accounts, direct accounts, and we have got direct traceability and tracking of those farmers. And that we did it with a digital tool, which I'll just come to. So on a supply chain front, we have been supplying to our growers our choicest of varieties and support them with agronomy. And we have got close to 250 people who work, grassroots level with these growers. And some of these growers are just giving us, say, a 5-ton, 7-ton production, which are like a half acre or 3/4 of an acre farmer. So those are the scales of the growers which we work with. We have been working with the relevant technologies, we have started developing farm-mounted, 6 to 12 horsepower mounted seed drills, and then even the harvesters, which are less than 1 lakh rupees cost in West Bengal. And also I've started working with farmer cooperatives there, so that then farmers will have some I would say a collective base where they can adopt technologies. We've also started linking with banks and insurance agencies. Today we have got our largest MOU with the State Bank of India, and all our farmers are also getting loans at very concessional rate, which is 4 to 7% of rate of interest to the growers. So and the last one is we also give contract farming buyback guarantee prices to growers. So this one actually, so we have started saying that if farmer, knows that his revenue is secure, he starts investing into farm relevant technologies, and then we, hold his hands throughout his crop growing process, and gradually see his yields, output, quality, everything improving. And since then his crop is guaranteed on price, we also see the farm incomes rising, and then he starts breaking his vicious cycle. And then when we could see actually a lot of change in their whole economic status, socioeconomic status within the village. Those growers were also our best ambassadors, and we also then see 2 growers in a village turned out to be another 4 growers or 40 growers in that village. So the entire village actually became growers base for PepsiCo. So, I mean, we are growing pretty handsomely in India. So, and so is our farmer base. I would say this is a I'll say a mutual trust model. We have got close to 98% retention ratio of farmers, which speaks about the close working relationship. So this is broadly our grower contract model. Now, the way we start working on, say, I have basically said something on the farm technology. There are other things which are working is the digital technologies, which we call them as precision agriculture. This is pretty much a common thing in, say, Western Europe and US for us. We are trying to see the soil parameters and the weather parameters available in through the government networks, and then try to do a crop modeling exercise, which and the subset of that will be like the leaf roll index and the vegetative index and the disease index, and then we try and like get this to growers through our mobile apps. So during the whole period of crop growing, we are tracking the crop pretty well and taking the corrective actions if needed. So this is a pilot we have started in India. We started with a slightly larger geography, which was Gujarat farmers. We found very good results, and we are trying to now take it to other parts of the country to see whether we can optimize our crop inputs, which is water, fertilizers, and also can have a good yield prediction. So that is kind of in a nutshell our program and the technology we are working with.
Thanks, Nishant. Just picking up from there, like to understand, Vasu, how are you guys looking at your entire supply chain procurement, and what is the role that digital is playing in that?
Yeah, so I think digital makes a very foundational infrastructure for us because it's the entire supply chain itself is a fairly small time frame. It just operates for about 12 hours. So the entire underlying digital infrastructure helps us to sort of procure and then move it to the warehouses faster, and then also to our retailers much faster. So that's like almost like oxygen for us, right? I mean, if a system goes down, then pretty much our operations sort of comes to a standstill. That's what we're looking at it. Especially in these times, it's important a lot more, because it sort of helps us reduce the uncertainty as much as possible. When I talk about uncertainty, it's predominantly on three areas. One is on the farming, on the sourcing side, predominantly in terms of understanding what's the availability, and then which farm make decisions in terms of where to source from, and sort of realign our supply chains much faster. Two, just purely from our internal supply chains in terms of the vehicle movements, the logistics side of planning, etc. How do we really plan for so much of uncertainty in terms of vehicle availability, in terms of the restrictions in terms of in the cities and etc. Third, especially importantly on the demand side, where there has been a huge fluctuation in terms of on the demand side. I mean, we have seen fluctuations within like a couple of days. Like in the next days, you'll see huge fluctuations, right? So how do you really react to that much faster to keep your wastage low? So these are the areas that we're trying to sort of look at patterns and then cut wastages to sort of ensure overall losses don't really go out of hand. Yeah.
And what kind of variations do you see from your demand forecasting to what you're able to procure, both on the plus and the minus side?
So on the procurement, let's say on a pre-COVID, we would sort of see a 3 to 4% sort of a range. That's on the worst days. But currently, we've seen that gone upwards about 7 to 8%. I mean, it was very high in the initial days, but now I think in the last at least 3-4 weeks, we have seen that sort of come down and get better. And again, we have seen that specific to certain cities are more volatile compared to other cities. Right. In South, we have seen a fair amount of stability, whereas in West and in North, we have seen continue to see volatility in terms of on the sourcing side. It sometimes goes as high as like 10-12% in some of the products. Yeah. So that's on the variability on the sourcing side currently we see. Yeah.
Okay. Karthik, what's been the experience of Waycool through this period, and obviously more on a steady state basis? How do you guys see your digital tools enabling your operations?
I think in this period we have, while we did obviously if we see a dip in demand in some of the channels that we serve, we are channel agnostic by definition, and people have to eat food. They're just eating it at home rather than eating outside. So one channel made up for the loss of the other. And while we did face some disruptions, like Vasu was saying, largely the South has been stable in terms of supply chains. So we have been operational. We do face minor disruptions every day in cities like Chennai, which are badly affected, but otherwise we're okay. Our learning has been that, we also started with the lens of farm to fork, but there's a reason we call it soil to sale. The margin spread or the rupee gross profit that you see in the farm to fork supply chain is chimerical. And I'm being very blunt about this. Right? We often say, okay, at the farm gate, an onion costs you 6 rupees or 7 rupees per kg. The retailer is selling it at 15 rupees per kg. So there is a huge spread available. It's not true. At the end of the day, we are a fragmented country. We need aggregators, we need disaggregators, we need a mandi in between. Maybe we eliminate one of those layers or two of those layers at best. But there are many costs that are non-compressible. For example, your transportation cost is 3 rupees or 3 rupees 50 paise a kg for onion everywhere from Nashik. That's a non-compressible cost. You can't do much about it. So you're sort of conning yourself if you think that there is a high gross margin business. Hence, it's important to look at what we assume is non-compressible when you're a farm to fork company and wonder whether it is compressible at all, which is the cultivation cost itself. So we started looking at that, and we've been running a program called Outgrow for the last 1.5 years. This is, while we have not created it as a foundation, it is essentially an agri-extension program. It does a couple of things. The first thing it does is it looks deep into the farmer's cultivation process itself with a few lenses. The first is, the farmer gets into an arrangement wherein our demand is made transparent, our long-term demand is made transparent to the farmer, and therefore we're able to commit that we lift everything that they produce. Second, we start measuring the soil health in situ and capture it digitally. We offer a package of practices, and we offer a cultivation plan and a package of practices, which is again monitored digitally. Lastly, we measure the output. For example, the bricks, acidity, etc. 29 parameters we measure, and we use that data as a closed loop feedback for the farmer. So if, for example, the soil is already nitrogen rich when we measure, and the output has high nitrate content, which is anyway not good for you. For example, onions with high nitrate will rot faster. Then we're able to provide feedback to the farmer saying, you know what, maybe you should look at your package of practices differently, and you don't need to plant beans now. You can, go back to planting another crop of vegetable itself. This gives a few benefits. The first thing is, as you know, agriculture is non-uniform yield. Our objective is to see how we can make it a little more uniform and therefore improve the weighted average price realization for the farmer. The second is to reduce cost of cultivation by avoiding over usage of chemicals and pesticides and so on. The third is also on better crop planning. We ran this experiment with coriander, for example, in southern India, where we realized that most farmers plant the full 2 acres in one shot, and then they struggle to liquidate the harvest. They also have to hire external labor for planting and harvesting. In our network, in our Outgrow program, they plant, the plot is divided into 24 squares, and they plant 1 square every 2 days, and they harvest 1 square every 2 days. That makes sure that the farmer's weighted average income is assured, and the volatility risk is hedged naturally. Secondly, the effort required is spread out through 48 days, and therefore they don't need external labor as much. The farmer's family is enough to it, and so it overall works out better for the farmer. So the idea is that we build a fairly large knowledge body based on these interventions that we do with various farmers, and then horizontally deploy it across the entire farm network. This makes that initial incompressible cost, which is the farm gate price, actually compressible, and therefore generates better margin, which we can split between ourselves and the farm. This has really been our learning in the past couple of years in particular.
That's pretty interesting, and at some point, like to understand how scalable is this model. But moving to Pallavi, Pallavi, you looking at tier 2 cities at Big Basket. What's been the experience in terms of being able to manage consumer demand, both in the pre-COVID context and I guess the COVID context is still evolving? And what are the kind of digital tools that are being deployed to support minimizing the variations?
Right. So interestingly, we found that fruits and vegetables has been a recruiter category for us. Meaning, someone who's not familiar with online purchase, you would assume that they would go for the FMCG products to try out the service first. But that's not been the case with us. We've always seen that fruits and vegetables form a large part of the first orders of a lot of first customers. So, cracking that category is absolutely a priority for us always. Pre-COVID also, that was a very big focus area. How do you ensure that you give the best quality, standard quality to the customers? And post-COVID, obviously the demand has gone up for services like Big Basket. So now we have a larger number of people coming on board, and we don't want to disappoint them, and we want to ensure that they get the best service and the best quality. So some of the challenges that we faced where digital helps. One is in the demand forecasting part. I think Vasu touched upon that briefly. That there's a large in case of B2C, there's a large variation in demand, actually, much more significant than what maybe NinjaCart has experienced now. Because on a day-to-day basis, people change the way they are, where they want to purchase from. So we found that if you forecast too less, then you risk running out of stock. And if you forecast too high, then you'll end up stocking a bunch of things, perishables, which you won't be able to, which you'll end up storing and then going bad in your facility. So demand forecasting is a very sensitive thing. You can't do too much and too less. So that's where, some algorithms and some data crunching has really helped us forecast better. And that is an iterative process. We'll keep doing that over time. So, that is one. Secondly, in terms of the supply chain piece, maintaining temperature of products which need temperature control, that is a very large piece for us. So sometimes it happens that some proactive person in one warehouse would store a particular vegetable, let's say bindi, at 5 degrees Celsius, and then you take it out and go for delivery at 40 degrees, then that vegetable is going to get destroyed. So how do you ensure that the temperature abuse doesn't happen over time? By maintaining a steady temperature right until the time it gets delivered to the customer. For that, we have some IoT devices in the in the boxes in which we transport F&B. So that gives us some idea as to what is the what are we able to deliver consistent temperature and consistent quality to customers by checking the temperature regularly on these devices. So these are some of the steps we take to kind of overcome the challenges that F&B as a perishable category has.
Pallavi, how much of this is getting communicated back to your supply sources, your vendors? They could be in-house or a third party, including some of the people in this panel. How much does get communicated is electronic? How does that happen, and what kind of feedback loops are in place?
So we regularly have a dialogue with the farmers. We have, in fact, we have collection centers all over the country. So we have experts and agronomists who are actually regularly in touch with the farmers and who keep giving this feedback to the farmers, whatever learnings we have, whatever expectations we have. So that is a year-long process.
Okay. One of the themes that is emerging from the four of you is really the whole idea of quality and delivery of a particular standard. I just want to pick up Ram's thinking on that. Intello Labs has developed tools on quality assaying. What's your take, Ram? How has been the acceptance of these digital tools? How scalable are these, and what challenges you see?
So, if you ask different people in the supply chain about quality of fresh produce, let's start from the end consumer. If you ask my wife, for instance, she says Whenever I order online, I get bad quality fresh produce, so I don't trust that. If you ask distributors, including some of the people on this call, they'll say that I know there are these select customers who reject my supplies randomly, and I'm sending good quality stuff, but they are rejecting for some random reason. If you ask farmers, they say we always supply good quality, but somewhere, once it reaches the DC, it gets rejected. The problem is, there is no trust and transparency in the system. When people supply, when people receive, they don't see eye to eye in terms of what was checked, what was not checked, why is it acceptable, why is it not acceptable, and what are controllable parameters, what are uncontrollable parameters. Like Pallavi was mentioning, if you put something in the cold storage and you take it out at a 40 degrees centigrade, obviously it's going to get messed up. You can't blame anybody in the system. It's just the nature of the business. There are other things which, it should have been checked. If a rotten potato is coming, a green potato is coming, or, something is infected, you should be able to control. So what we are increasingly seeing is interest from a variety of players, and interestingly, even smaller players who are just starting business, keen to deploy technology to bring that standardization and systemization and technology to the fore. And historically as a company, we've kind of started from the end. We went to the retailers, and then we started working with the distributors. And now we are actually seeing a lot of, both distributors as well as growers who are saying that, can I get some quality certificate which I can share with my buyer, thereby building, trust in the system and so on and so forth. So the interest and uptake has definitely been there. Challenges, as you can imagine, it takes time to build the technology on one end. The other is, with COVID, people are scared, and people want to deploy technology, but they're not sure where to start. And those kind of starting problems we see in many cases.
Okay, we'll come back to pick up more on that. Aditya, when you share your experiences of your business, you guys have been around for over 5 years, right?
Yeah, we've been around for 4, and
okay.
one of the core things that was there in the beginning and still there in a way is we tend to focus on the individual farmers' problems, and they kind of tend to remain the same. Like what Ram was saying over here, when you look at something as simple as size, right, when it comes to quality, a farmer's understanding of ABC or a big, small, medium is very different from the person whom he is selling it to. So in a way, what we talk about the lack of trust is that when you approach a farmer, the farmer's always like, traders to paise kama liye, main to apne gaon mein reh raha hu, or something of that nature, right? At the end of the day, all of that trust, it's not necessarily always transparency. In some cases it is. A lot of it is just about what they think is correct is not what the rest of the market looks at, right? So for instance, you were talking initially about how tech plays a role. So tech is kind of the thing that you need to bring about any sort of change. Otherwise, goods that were moving from the farm to the market are still kind of moving from the farm to the market. It's just about removing certain number of the intermediaries that can be, not all of them, because in all cases that is not viable or advisable either, because they do provide a lot of value. In other cases, it's about not the fact that, acha, does the farmer use an app? Because see, if you're talking about him selling his crop, he's selling it like 2, 3, max 4 times a year on average in India. So uska app ki koi zarurat nahi hai. I mean, you really don't need a person to use it once a quarter. Like that app is anyways not going to be very viable. So the use of technology has to focus more on the quality aspect, as we've already discussed. It kind of has to also focus on getting the relevant stakeholders onboarded. The farmer obviously is a key player in that, and he's the cornerstone of everything here. But it's about getting, let's say, storages onboarded, getting transporters, individual vehicle owners, where the weighing bridge is located, getting all of that kind of mapped out. Because when you need to have a dispatch taking place at night, us time pe agar sahi one of your regular weigh bridges has broken and you need to send it somewhere else, those are the kinds of issues that you face, because us karan se kya hoga, the vehicle won't be weighed and the farmer won't be paid on time. So kind of capturing all of that information is very, very essential. So that's kind of the second way in which that tech plays a role. And the third, which I mentioned earlier, was transparency. There's certain things that you can do. So for instance, like we do our own quality assessment of the produce as well, based on image processing and computer vision. So then you kind of provide those reports to the farmer in an understandable format. When you're actually engaging with the farmers, whether it be discussions on rate, you're not just talking about the fact that acha, you're going to get 10 rupees per kg for this. You're also going to talk about other responsibilities and other terms and conditions that come in the transaction. It's like, okay, it's 10 rupees a kg, then this is the acceptable level of X, this is the acceptable level of Y, this needs to be ready by Z date. That becomes critical. And that's where a lot of the times, because of the lack of, I guess, properly documented information, which you can only do it digitally, you can't really keep doing that on paper, farmers in a way tend to get duped or tend to get the bad end of a deal, because a local trader will come and tell him, I'll buy it at 10, the farmer sells it to him at 10. Money he's only going to get later, but then the local trader comes in and says, you didn't pack it in the right packaging. You gave me a jute bag instead of a lino bag, or you didn't have it ready at the time I wanted it. So deductions, okay, the eventual realized price ends up being less. So what happens is that when you talk with the farmer, sharam ke mare, he will never tell you that he actually sold it for less than 10 rupees a kg. He'll tell you he sold it at 10, whereas the effective price realization may have been lesser than that. So these are the kind of the kinks in the way in which things are done currently, where technology plays a role. It's not the idealistic impression of, I guess, a farmer holding an app and looking into the distance. So
great. I think Nischint and Karthik talked about crop planning. Nischint in the case of like potatoes for PepsiCo, and Karthik, you mentioned that you are working with some farmers to plan production and harvest. What has been the experience in that, Anu? Have you looked at crop planning as a tool for building reliability in supply chain? How do you use digital tools to work with farmers, if at all you're in that direction?
Yeah, so I resonate so much with Aditya. This is the quality and then the standard and then the understanding of the quality is very different for everyone. So we might have the grades for our own organization, grade A, grade B, grade C. But to make them understand what is exactly grade A is really difficult. Also, there are so many commodities in the fresh. So the grade A for every commodity would be, the parameters for grade A for every commodity would be different. Also, he said there would be discussion on rates based on the quality, based on the other factors and all. So we feel that, if you can't predict the price in the supply side, this model is not scalable. You can't keep negotiating with every farmer for every commodity at every village or somewhere So currently what we're doing is we are building price prediction model and towards supply side, not towards the demand side. And also I heard a lot in this discussion that people are doing the demand prediction and all. Whereas what we're doing is we're basically predicting the supply directly from the farmers. So when they are using the mobile app, so they can actually fill what they're growing, how much they're growing, when the produce will be ready. And we give them the predicted price based on the model. And we use multiple variable model, which gives them price at every, so we are basically building mobile pickup stations into different villages to procure the fruits and vegetables. And at every MPS, we basically predict the price for every commodity. And these farmers select the MPSs, like nearest MPS to them. MPS is mobile pickup station. And accordingly, we basically predict the prices for every MPS. So this is one of the things that we're doing, which has been helping us in terms of scaling the model and reducing the negotiations and all. But definitely the quality still is challenging. I mean, we have defined grade A, grade B, grade C, and there are different prices for grade A, grade B, grade C. And even if they feel when they're filling the, when they're putting it on the app, even if they feel like it's grade A, and when the quality team checks on it falls into grade C. So it automatically falls into grade C, and then the price automatically gets adjusted accordingly. But the point is that to check the quality, it's such a manual work. And even if we use, let's say, Entlo Labs, I feel like it can only check the quality of certain volume. It can't check the quality of the whole volume which we're buying directly from the farmers. So this has been a challenge so far, and we are still looking for we are still working on this. How can we solve this? But definitely the price prediction model has been really helping in terms of scaling, and also capturing the supply in advance from the farmers instead of capturing the demand in advance has also really been helpful in terms of, mapping the demand and supply based on their data intelligence. So I think these are the two things which has been helping in terms of technology, which is helping in scaling up. And also we are basically doing smart route mapping from these different MPSs, from these villages to collection centers to the warehouse and then mandis, which I think everyone else is also doing the smart route mapping. So yeah, that's what we are doing, and those are the digital tools has been helping.
That's pretty interesting. You're covering a lot of aspects, right from production to pricing to pickup and quality assurance. I think that seems to be something that is a trend that a lot of people would need to. Well, many AgTech entrepreneurs would need to cover all those key activities. Varun, what's been your experience in being able to match forecasted demand with your available supply sources? I'm looking at the pre-COVID scenario. I mean, COVID is an aberration in some sense. So, and how has your digital capability been contributor to that?
Sure. So, see, at our end, the way, I mean, we have kind of mapped all the I would say the whole supply chain through, at every point there is tech which is basically being used to kind of, track and map out the whole supply chain. Now, specifically in terms of sourcing, see what ends up happening is that, we kind of, for every commodity, depending on season, right? And, this is more true of Delhi, is that, there's the seasonal variation so much that your produce sources, change drastically. Like, for example, if I talk about winters, right? So winter crop out here would be commodities like cauliflower, cabbage, and then, other commodities that kind of grow during the winters. And then, summer crop is more like the gourds, okra and so on and so forth. And the winter crops move to Himachal and areas like that. So for us, the way we do it is that, I mean, we've been around for 4 years now. So we have a good sense as to, in which season, what commodity sells, in what quantities, basis are retailer base and now consumer base. So we try to map that out, and then we try to identify, farmers who are growing that and can supply us. And for every commodity, we would kind of have at least, 2 or 3 farmers in a particular region who can basically supply us commodities in appropriate quantities. Like, for example, if we consume like a ton of cauliflower, so then, like in this season, we would have, like in Himachal area, at least, 2 farmers or farmer groups who are independently, can supply us 500 kgs each. Now, and, we map this over 2-3 months or however long, their growing cycles are. So that is, one thing that we do. I would say this is kind of a mix. When I say, use tech for it, tech is used for forecasting. And, I guess all of us do it. And other than that, tech is also used for day-to-day interactions. Like, for example, every day once the produce would hit our warehouse, as soon as it is, there's a GRN done on it, then, the farmer group would get a notification that, look, your produce is now in, this was the agreed upon value price that we had agreed, and, this is your ledger, and this is the amount that is due to you, and this will be paid out on, on so-and-so date. This is the terms that we have. So I would say, we are using technology a lot for, I would say the daily transaction piece of it. So I think that is where it happens. Daily demand forecasting that we do, we use, technology for that as well, and to communicate to the farmer group as well. But I would say, I would say from the perspective of mapping out the various, farmers and the crops that they're going to grow over the course of the season. So most of that is, right now I would say is managed through Excel sheets of sorts. And other than that, from an end-to-end supply chain perspective, all the demand we capture that through tech, obviously. So both consumers and retailers, they have an app on which, basis the prediction, as much quantity becomes available, and is only available, and the overall booking has to be restricted within the prediction. So I think these are some of the areas where technology is used. Other than that, we keep track of shelf life of produce within our system using tech, in the sense that commodities like spinach and leafy and stuff, so they have to come and go. They can't sit in the system for too long. But if I talk about commodities like a potato or an onion, right, so typically we would assume they have a shelf life of, let's say, 6 days or 7 days. And we would say that let that sit in our system for a maximum of 2 days, because we want the retailers or the consumer to get the 5 days. So the system would alert that, look, this is nearing 2 days, so you have to get rid of it, get rid of it from your system and dispose it off somehow, which would mean that either we would in these days we have NGOs that we would give it out to, but we would not then sell it to our consumers. So it's used in the context of keeping track of shelf life, also in the context of traceability, in the sense that if, let's say, you as a consumer you got a specific produce from us, let's say 2 days back, and you cut it today, and let's say there was a problem, so we can trace it back into our systems and tell you exactly that who we got it from, and basically try to figure out the root cause, and if communicate that to the grower. If the guy fixes it next day, great. If not, then we would probably end up changing our source. So I think these are, I would say, some of the ways in which we use technology a lot throughout our supply chain.
Great. Riken, a lot of these businesses would not succeed if the first mile logistics is not in place. What's been your experience in deploying digital in making first mile logistics happen at Loop?
Yeah, no, I think it's great to hear everyone's various ventures. Very impressive. So at Loop, we basically are a shared transportation service for farmers to make a booking via call center or mobile app, batch those pickup requests, and route that produce to a combination of mandi or collection centers or retailers. To be honest, most of the produce does end up going to mandi. This is even pre-COVID, and especially in places like Bihar, but even here in Karnataka, just because the bigger volumes continue obviously to be traded through the informal sort of networks of gadidars and veparis and the like. And where we found sort of tech really being helpful have been to, one, do optimization of load capacity of these trucks, and then two, to pass back some of this information about the prices that farmers are realizing between mandis and collection centers, and not just price, but also volume that they're able to sell, to help the farmers sort of make decisions with respect to which combination or market destination they want to take their produce to.
And do you think there is an opportunity whereby either farmers or the customers are willing to pay a higher value-added logistics service?
Right now, no. So I would say that it's kind of people want the lowest cost, right, transportation, and that's what we try to do by enabling farmers to share a truckload, as opposed to taking your produce on a partially filled vehicle, right, which is obviously expensive to have a one-to-one transfer from a farmer to a market if they're not able to fill the full.
Okay, so it's still work in progress model. Let's see how it goes along. One of the themes that came from what Nishchint mentioned and even Varun mentioned was traceability. Just want to hear thoughts on what do people see as traceability, how important it is. I guess, really in the post-COVID scenario, hopefully we'll have a soon post-COVID scenario. Obviously for brands like PepsiCo's Frito-Lay, traceability becomes very important. But how important is it, and what kind of digital tools are being used to build traceability both internally, and at what stage do you bring that knowledge to your customers or consumers? I mean, Ram mentioned how his wife is not trusting of the regular e-tailers on fruits and vegetables. So how do you build that confidence both at the front end as well? Yeah, open to anybody. Nishchint, you want to take a quick shot?
Yeah, actually, I mean, it will become more and more important. I would say, if it is not one thing which consumer is demanding specifically. It's easy when you have got large scale growers. Then you can have a larger batch, and then all the, that one larger batch will serve a factory for, say, for example, 15 days or 20 days. So you can backtrack then from your batch number of your product, that this farm it comes from. But when you are dealing with thousands and those kind of numbers, it's very difficult then to establish the traceability. We have invested in a tool where we as every grower for us is mapped in the system, and even if he's supplying 3 tons to us, even 1/5 of a truck, that's a lot number for us. So we take it and we give a payment receipt to him, and then check his quality and give his incentive or penalty to him, and then we give him the communication that day itself. We take that batch itself up to our stores, and that batch is stored in batch as a separate batch, and then taken to our factory. So from a bag of Lay's, we are actually getting into and that's our aspirational goal, to see whether we can track it to the last field it came from. So we are not there yet, but we are working towards it. And we'll basically trying to get us traceability from our bag, which produced the 10 gram or 15 grams of chips, to the last grower who grew it for us. So technology definitely will play a role in it. We are investing in it. We are moving ahead in this. I'll say we are almost 70-80% there. Few more years and we'll be there.
Great. Pallavi, what's been the experience of Big Basket in building traceability, both at the supply side and the consumer side?
Yeah, so that is something we've been building and working on, actually, where we want to communicate to the customers, to the last customer, where the product came from, all the way, regarding the farmer, a little bit about the farmer somewhere on the package, all the way to the customer. Our mission is obviously to reduce the time between harvest to delivery. So and if we have stability in sourcing, then I think this traceability becomes simpler, because then you don't keep changing your supply sources, and traceability will become easier. So yes, that is a very big priority for us. And I also think that post-COVID, that will become even more important, because safety, hygiene has become a very big priority now. So, we
quick
continue
question
to
for
focus on that.
Sorry. Quick question for Anu and Nishant. Do you see consumers willing to pay for it?
My frank answer today is no, and I think tomorrow, it could be yes. As Pallavi is saying, a post-COVID scenario, I think consumers are getting more and more aware. If they also, they are also aware what they are consuming, and they are very sensitive to the agrochemicals and the other residual effect of those which are coming to their food chain through the agro raw materials. I think if we are able to say that yes, the farmer who grew it has got sustainable farm practices, which were safe and safe for consumption, and I think if we make consumer aware, surely it will come. Today, I think answer is no, but it's coming.
Anu, your thoughts?
Yeah, so for us, we actually don't deal directly, majorly with end consumers, but from a system perspective, it is very, very important for us. So for example, which produce is coming from which MPS, from which farmer, and through which CC to which warehouse, so that accordingly we can backtrace and we can plan our next seasons accordingly. And even when we're planning the expansions and all, we plan according to those commodity tracing. So we do the tracing as per the, like, primary point is the farmer, then the commodity, then the MPS, and then follow on. So definitely from an organization perspective and from planning and scalability perspective, it is very important for us. But from the user perspective, we really don't have any idea. As such, we don't deal with the end users. And also we majorly deal with HoReCa, and they really don't care about, where the produce is coming from and all those. But considering after post-COVID scenario, I think people would preferably would be willing to know whether this produce is safe or not, where it is coming from and all. So I think, yeah, there is a lot potential in future.
Vasu, want to pick your brains on this whole idea of wastages through the supply chain, and how do you guys track those? How do you guys minimize those? What kind of digital tools are being deployed?
Okay. Yeah. So I think for us, since we're a B2B, and since we also want to work on a forecast model where we forecast and then procure and then sort of take the demand, we inherently run a lot of risk structurally in terms of high wastage days. Actually, there are days where you could just it's raining heavily and then customers are not ordering because they have not made sale to their end consumer. So that's a uncertainty, and when the current times uncertainty is even more. So there are a few things that we do. One is, data is one huge leverage for us. We continue to sort of look at it very closely to see, especially high value, high perishable SKUs, which tend to cause more losses for us. We either go short on those SKUs. We say, okay, hey, this is high value and highly perishable. Let's not really predict or focus more. Sort of keep them on the lower side. Whereas all the non-perishables or the low value, highly perishable items, we would be comfortable predicting more. So that's those are one of the example how we sort of deal at a data side. The other thing also, what we're trying to do is all the unsold items. Let's say we focus on broad. We're figuring out new channels to sort of liquidate them, because early what used to happen is we should sort of take it to mandis, and then we would have wholesalers for whom we would sort of give it at an attractive price. But now those channels have sort of got into uncertainty. So we do a lot of these things. We do in fact work with some of the vendors from the tier 2 cities. We look at the markets outside our current focus areas and then see if we could liquidate some of our stocks. So it's a both actually. It's both in terms of how do we really improve our forecasting and make it a little more effective, and at the same time how do we really continue to figure out new ways to channelize, liquidate some of these items. I think these are the major ones. There are small things we're doing, but I think these two has major impact in terms of how do you reduce the wastage.
Yeah. Okay, I think in the recent past, we've seen a lot of government announcements on how markets and supply chains are going to be restructured. Right from the whole fact that mandis are one more channel now, farmers can sell to anybody. Of course, those regulations will come in the due course of time. And more recently, government of Telangana announcing that they will now use technology to tell the farmers what to grow in the Kharif season. They're doing it in the context of cereal crops, but that clearly has an influence on fruits and vegetables, because the farmers who don't have an option to grow a certain cereal crop may be looking at doing fruits and vegetables, or the government is saying all the farmers closer to urban consumption centers grow F&V. What is the take on these interventions, and more so the like of Telangana government rather than just the national policy announcements? Open to everybody. Anybody wants to take a shot on that? How do you think those will disrupt, or is there a disruption that will cause to the supply chains? Karthik?
I guess I'll take this in two parts. The first is the specific question on the Telangana government intervention, and the second is around the policies that the central government has announced intentions of implementing. I think if done well, the Telangana government intervention is useful. In fact, one of the things that we have been talking about is to see whether public information can be tapped into, such as ISRO's real-time data on what's being sowed. And that used to predict, that used to send signals to the farmers. You can't direct the farmers to cultivate or not, but at least signals go out and the farmer takes an informed decision. Principle is very simple. We've been in existence for 5 years. I've seen 9 times so far when tomato, for example, goes to 60 rupees a kg and then drops to 100 rupees a kg. We don't consume 60 times more tomato because it drops to 100 rupees a kg. Demand is completely inelastic. But the supply is so volatile because the farmer gets their input from the nearest Artiya or their neighbor or the seed seller. And all of them are going to give you information based on past or current performance, not based on what the future holds. So centralized information on real time, how much is the sowing that's happening that can be connected to any mandi. The cluster of farms that are sowing a certain crop that can be connected to the nearest mandi that's available real time. If executed well, I think it's a useful intervention. It, of course, depends on how much the farmers choose to adopt and follow, but that's a useful intervention. On the central interventions, one needs to see the substance of the reforms. Yes, I think in large parts, especially in categories like fresh produce, the role of the APMC has been relatively diminished even prior to the announcement. But there are some confusing laws. For example, I think recently we discovered that in Karnataka, if you're buying directly from the farmer, there is a 1% cess, and you need a registration. Similarly, in Telangana, any fruits and vegetables that passes through your warehouse, you need to pay a warehouseman cess. So if and 80% of the time, material from that goes into Hyderabad comes from Chikbalapur. But does that mean I pay 2 cesses? So there's a lot of confusion around this, which I guess will get eased out because of this. While APMC registration hasn't been a hindrance to doing business, the uncertainty and lack of clarity around it has always resulted in some confusion and some reluctance to enter into this business. In staples, I'm sure the intervention will be much more meaningful. Broadly, I mean, my view is that APMC was created with the intent of protecting the farmer. Any such system tends to ossify over time and must be shaken up. Even the current regime that the government introduces, I can guarantee you 5 years later that there will be some sense of cartelization that happens and the government will have to shake it up. So it's their responsibility to keep us honest, but not through direct intervention, but regulatory interventions. To that extent, it's welcome. But I would rather comment on it after seeing the substance of the reforms.
Okay, great, Karthik. Vasu, what's your take on that? The general liberalization of supply opportunities for the farmer and the kind of interventions that Telangana government is proposing?
Yeah, so I think even before this sort of came in, I think in reality some of these were already happening. Right? I mean, though there were regulations, I think government was okay in farmers sort of selling directly to non-APMC sort of a route. They were opening up, especially we have seen a lot of governments been very proactive in terms of letting farmers sort of democratize the entire selling process. But I think like Karthik said, I think it's an encouraging step. I think it really works out well if they sort of implement in a way it really brings in a change. I think it could have a huge impact. I think I'm more curious to sort of see how this could really happen on ground and then really lead to a change, a structural change in the entire the way we sort of grow vegetables and fruits, and of course the entire other crops.
Okay, sounds like if it happens, it's a potential welcome change. Your thoughts, Nishchint, on this? Nishchint, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm not very well aware of what Telangana government order came. I mean, I'm sitting outside, so actually I'm not.
No, but more in terms of the larger changes in terms of opening up of agriculture markets. What is the thought?
Definitely, I mean, it will give farmers choices. I mean, and government can be an enabler. Like, if demands and supplies are met, that is the happiest situation. The thing is, these are all fruits and vegetables which have got very poor shelf life. And we have seen, as Karthik was saying, 10 rupees to 100 rupees. And if government interventions are there and they can provide intelligence and see, what are the expected arrivals month on month, because demand is kind of inflexible for potatoes, onions, and few vegetables. So I mean, I think government can be the enabler and provide that intelligence to growers, and then that will be good for the whole ecosystem.
Okay, so before I open it for questions from the participants and hand it over to Ritu, just one question for all of you. I know all of you work on some level of proprietary data sets and technologies. is there one data set that you believe that should be out in the public domain, which could be accessed by logistics service providers or the financial service providers or large companies or farmers or anybody, which should be out there in the public domain? What would that be? Aditya, your thoughts?
Sounds a bit too good to be true. I mean, from that perspective, I mean, I don't think anyone here wouldn't welcome that, because again, when you talk about having that kind of data, you have to talk about how you actually collect that data. So it would be next to impossible for any one of us over here to do that at a scale of, let's say, millions of farmers in a reasonable period of time. And so whatever decision making, whatever models that we build are restricted by that particular subset of data that we're able to collect in the region or the crops that we deal in. So if anyone can do that, I mean, it's the government. I don't see the viability for a private enterprise to do that, at least at this stage. In terms of how that would be useful, I mean, you could make it accessible in the form of an open API system, and then everyone can kind of build upon it. So I don't think that part is what we need to worry about. It's more about how do you firstly collect it? How do you do it at scale? How do you make sure it's updated? Because it's not something that you collected once and then you're done with it. So that needs to be kind of taken care of as well. I mean, something as basic as phone numbers. If you're talking about that when we register our users, farmers use prepaid phone numbers, and they change that depending on whatever is the cheapest. So many times we register farmers with phone numbers, and the next season we aren't able to reach out to the same set of farmers because now that number is no longer operational, it belongs to someone else. So how do you tackle that? So I mean, those kinds of considerations would definitely go behind it. But yeah, if the day that comes into existence, I'll be the first one to thank you.
Okay, great. Varun, what's your take on that one critical data set that should become open source for everybody to build their products on, proprietary tools and analytics?
So, see, ideally, if you ask me, I've kind of seen, farmers across the board, predicting कि next season में price क्या होगा. Like, for example, happens a lot of time with like commodities like potatoes कि भाई साल ज़्यादा उगाया है या साल कम उगाया है, and then they would kind of predict कि भाई इस बार rate बहुत ऊपर जाने वाला है, इस बार कम जाने वाला है, and then they would decide whether to store it or not to store it. So I mean, ideally, now I don't know how this is going to come. I guess there are people that can figure out. But ideally, अगर if you get a whole land map of India कि कहाँ पे क्या कितनी quantity में उग रहा है, I think this can really be used to do a lot of prediction around कि how will prices vary, and even when farmers make buying decision, right? So a lot of that is just collaborative information जो कहीं आसपास किसी farmer से आई होगी. It's a lot just talking hustle bustle कि ओ अच्छा ये होने वाला है, ये है, अरे उसने बहुत उगाया है तो इस बार कम जाएगा, इस बार ज्यादा जाएगा, एंड इसके बेस पे डिसीजंस होते हैं, बड़े डिसीजंस होते हैं. तो मतलब if something like this ideally which is very important, right? Because fundamentally that will decide the fate of whether farmer is going to make profit in that season or is going to make a loss in that season, right? I mean, this is very important decision making कि इस season में मैं अपने land पे क्या उगाऊं. It's a very huge decision. तो अगर ये कहीं से you kind of have a map of the whole country कि कहाँ पे क्या कितना उग रहा है, मतलब कैसी quality आने वाली है and things like that, I think that information will be a lot of help to help people decide कि what to grow, and then accordingly prices and everything will kind of fall in place. So yeah, this I think is one thing.
Pallavi,
Yeah,
you're smiling. What's your take on this, Pallavi?
No, so I was, I tend to agree. I think one of the bigger pieces where some transparency would help is on the pricing bit. Just yesterday's example, tomato 1 kg was available in the south at some 7 rupees per kg. And the same thing was available in another region at 27 rupees per kg. So there is a huge discrepancy between supply and demand right now. And if we are able to bridge that gap, so I think net of transportation as well, you would still make money as a person who is supplying fruits and vegetables, and the customers would benefit because people would get the vegetables that they want. So there'll be a larger variety available in all the locations in India. So I think if we get the transparency in pricing and in availability, that will really help.
So just a very quick point. So, I think ये AgMarkNet पे, some of this data is there. मतलब, see, it is not very accurate, but, you'll get a relative sense कि, मतलब, so for example, अगर, the actual price there is 26 and, here it is 7, तो हो सकता है उस पे skewed हो, मतलब इस पे दिखेगा something like 20 and 5. But I think कुछ हद तक ये है, मतलब, it's not like, in your ideal format में नहीं है, but वहाँ से कुछ scrape तो किया जा सकता है.
No, it's interesting that you people have not mentioned the access to consumer data, because ultimately that's driving what is getting sold, and that's where revenues get generated. And obviously that's really probably the most difficult part. And going back to Ram's original comment about how fickle consumers can be, or shoppers can be. I think on that note, I've just got to pick Vasu's thoughts on this and then hand it over to Ritu to just pick up the questions and some of the key issues and build on that. Vasu, your comments on this one important key data set that should be available in public domain so everybody can build on it. Vasu, you're on mute.
Yeah, sure. So I think one is, of course, I think like Karthik mentioned before, I think the supply data is going to be a fairly very huge thing that will have a very huge structural change in the way the entire, the fresh produce supply chain works. I think pricing, we can still figure it out because it's still a supply and demand. How much ever you try and do on the pricing, it's going to continue to be subjective and then, changing. But I think just sheer bringing the supply data onto one place and sort of telling us, okay, hey, what is getting grown across India, what is the expected arrivals of each of these things, would just sort of help us plan a lot of things, and also would help the farmers to sort of identify, okay, what to sow and then what to grow, what not to grow. So that would sort of bring a lot more equilibrium and then just reduce the volatility, right? I think in my view, I think just supply data alone should be a goldmine to change this industry.
Okay, great. Ritu, all yours. Thanks everybody, and handing over to Ritu to kind of pick up the questions from all the other participants and some of the key issues that are emerging from this last hour of pretty intense conversation. Lots to do, and I guess lots to collaborate on is what I must say. Ritu, over to you.
Thank you, Raman. And since I have the mic, I'll start with my question. How's that? So be a little nepotism over here. But, we've talked about digital, right? But would somebody like to address how is digital enabling scale? I mean, a lot of you all talked about how digital is, there's a digitalization of things that have been happening in the system, right? And obviously that is helpful here. But do you envision digital being able to drive these things to a different scale?
I'd like to, from using technology or any kind of digital means, it's not, at least from what we have seen, it's not about, I guess, reaching out to supply side or reaching out to the farmers or making that more scalable. I mean, you'll still need to have feet on the ground in order to do that. In every region that you launch, and you kind of talk about it as there are network effects, but network effects are restricted to, let's say, a bunch of villages or one tehsil at a maximum. So one tehsil, you may do wonderful work and really help out farmers there, but you go to another one 50 kilometers away, you kind of have to start from scratch over there. So digital doesn't come in from a point of view of enabling greater farmer outreach or supply side outreach. The way we've seen it work is in the optimizations at scale regarding the supply chain itself. So for instance, when you're transporting several crops, they have a lot of moisture content. So it becomes essential to track what is the loss in weight when you're transporting it over different distances and different seasons. And know that if you've transported, let's say, 25,000 kgs, you're actually getting 24,970 delivered. And then factoring that into future purchase decisions so that you're able to make the economics work out. So that's kind of how it works. And very simple things, which I would say not any one of us kind of can claim to do that ourselves, but that's kind of the infrastructure that we are built on and lucky to have that, is like digital payments. So for instance, when you're paying farmers, till he gets that SMS on his phone, which indicates that the money has gone into his bank account. I mean, if you didn't have that, you wouldn't be able to dispatch on time and to make sure that the goods reach in the case of within 12 hours if you're doing in a certain case. So that we kind of maybe don't necessarily think of it as something more fairly recent, but that's where the scalability aspect comes in, because if you were unable to do that, you would not be able to purchase and manage a supply chain beyond a certain scale. Seeing all the traders who exist in the industry, we kind of work in a 5x5 room and are able to do tens, if not hundreds of crores of business. You can definitely get up to a very big level without having any technology, with just your phone. It's about how you go beyond that. I guess the threshold would be somewhere in the hundreds of crores, but that's kind of where you reach the upper limit of what you can manage on your phone without actually managing all of the data in-house. So that's where the scalability aspect comes in, not necessarily on reaching out to the farmers and kind of getting them on board.
Anybody else have any comments?
I'd like to share the example of Cardamom as a business. So if you know about Cardamom, it's primarily sold through auctions. And it's typically physical auctions where traders assemble in one of the two auction houses, one in the Kerala side and one in the Tamil Nadu side, and they all come and sit there and they physically see the samples and then they enter their bids. It's an e-auction, but it happens in a physical center. And because of COVID, the entire auction process has been stopped. And farmers are really struggling with unsold stocks. The traders who had bought in the previous auctions are not able to sell because they are completely dependent on the physical auction. So much so that the entire community has kind of ganged up against the government, and the government has decided that they will do an e-auction because the trade has to happen. I mean, how long will you sit without it? Still finalizing the step. They're probably going to go ahead with ENAM, and they still have questions unaddressed on quality. But it's a great example of an entire commodity business under a question mark because it didn't have a digital platform earlier, and now it will have.
Got it. I think thanks for bringing up, Ram, the COVID thing. I think there is a question out here which says, there are obviously changes in how these supply chains and what you guys have been doing. What's temporary? What's here to stay? Anybody?
I think in my view, I think 90% or more than that, I think we'll all go back to the old way of doing things. I think though at NinjaCard, we're doing a lot of initiatives, with respect to COVID in terms of apartment deliveries or B2C, etc. But I think our thesis is I think a lot of these things would just sort of get back to the older state, because people will always sort of do what is convenient for them and not really go that extra mile to really give it right. So I think we're not really betting very hugely on COVID use case and sort of see that will it sort of get extended and become a new normal? Not really in a very aggressive way.
Okay, anyone have a opposing viewpoint here? What's anything that you think will stay?
Yes, this is Varun here. Yeah, I mean, what we are seeing is that some of the changes seem to be getting, more permanent in a way. Like, for example, the wholesale markets out here, the tonnage that they're doing, Azadpur alone, which normally did 25,000 tons, is now doing 5,000 tons a day barely. And even when I speak with the government, right, so what they are kind of realizing is that suddenly these mandis are becoming like hotspots. So they shut down for 2-3 days, then they again open it up, and the red zone, green zone thing keeps on happening. So because of which the some of changes that I am seeing is that so for example, the Haryana government was looking at a separate facility for doing this trade. So in Gennor, they kind of have a facility which is, I would say, more open, more spaced out. So probably there the trading can happen in a more, I would say, COVID friendly format, at distances and things like that, because what they've realized is ki Azadpur Mandi and all of these these places are never going to be COVID friendly. So actually we are seeing and they're kind of inviting players like us ki aap wahan pe jagah le lo and basically operate from there. So actually I wouldn't be surprised that, some of these changes might just be, here to stay, some of them.
New infrastructure here. Nischint, were you saying something? I think Karthik, you would.
Yeah,
I think the COVID has basically brought in, in the sense of, I would say consumers are demanding more hygienic products. I mean, but even if we go back to normal days, and hopefully it comes soon, is like, the consumers would demand corporates or even like from their suppliers the quality and the traceability where of what he's consuming. He's going to be more and more aware of this, and I think the suppliers need to be providing much more quality assurance to the consumers.
We won't want the cheapest thing. We want to pay a little more for better stuff, is it?
Yeah, hopefully, yes, this is coming. I say it's increasing trend and it should come.
Karthik, you wanted to.
I think we're seeing 2 or 3 things. One is actually the most important thing is that there is a little more willingness to engage with digital platforms in both ends of our supply chain. The end user on the one side as well as the farmer on the other side. The question is which platform will succeed. Frankly, we've done more transactions on WhatsApp during the last 2 months, and some even on Twitter, than on any app-based platform or marketplace or any such thing. So the most convenient platform will win, but there is openness because we have seen clear instances where the traditional, within quotes, much wanted supply chain failed. And access created through digital platforms were most successful for the farmer. I think there are enough case examples now. Question is, what is going to be the right platform to succeed?
But the platforms will stay. The digital engagements will stay.
The willingness to engage is definitely gone up. It's definitely gone up. We're seeing that right.
Okay. There's a next set of questions around pricing that you guys were talking about, and sort of, what is it with no APMCs? How do you price? How are prices going to get set here? Anybody?
I mean, I think, it's going to go to the good old, like, for example, I know, PepsiCo has, longer term contracts with farmers on which, the prices that they would agree on would be fundamentally different from, what the wholesale market prices would be. So I think, a lot of things would move in that direction. And, from a farmer's perspective, I guess, the rationale would be that, look, I'll look at my growing cost, I'll look at, the markup that I'm getting. And if fundamentally, I'm making money, which is, in tune with, what I need or what I'm expecting, and it's not too far off, then I think, it'll continue. And I think a lot of prices will move in that direction, assuming the whole APMC's, price mechanism, does not exist. But, I don't feel that's going to happen though. I think like even in today's world, the commodities that are being traded, that I would say the quantums have gone down, but the pricing is still being decided.
For crops that can be stored, farmers are just holding on to them majorly. So they aren't, because they just don't know. So the prices that they're getting from the APMCs are much lower than obviously, let's say, what they would have expected pre-COVID. So they're just holding on, which kind of leads to a point where later in the season, the more this stretches out, it may actually worsen potentially if we have a lot of supply coming in at that stage altogether.
So we're predicting a lot more volatility here.
Yeah, because see, in the active in the times of a lack of pricing information, people the comfortable thing to do is to wait and to hold on to it. Because when every farmer stores, and particularly talking about that kind of a scenario here, there is a ballpark figure in his head at which price he would minimum be willing to talk about. And that price as of today is markedly higher than what the market is willing to give. Whether that will change 2-3 months down the line, I don't know. So if you look at a crop like potato, come November odd, you kind of have to make the cold storages empty in order to prepare for the next season. So when you come down to November, the closer you keep getting to that date, farmers keep getting more and more wary. So that's where we may see more distress sales, the way at least I'm predicting it to happen. But the demand's going to be the same. It's even if it goes back to pre-COVID times, it's not going to match the supply that exists at that point in time. So that's kind of one unfortunate prediction that may come about in a few months from now.
Okay, I have one more question, and this is a little bit, actually I have two. One about logistics, Karthik, and I think, Karthik, this is quite a sort of address, perhaps if you can address, and Ricken, maybe if you have something to add to this, right? I mean, you talked about non-compressible costs here, right? And especially you mentioned logistics, and the question is around logistics and saying, you know, is there no opportunity here to compress that cost by bundling across other commodities here? Right, and you know, can you be using digital platforms here that you're moving goods, and it's about optimization of routes and loads here? Is that cost? Are there not inefficiencies in that cost, and can you see some compression of those costs by other stuff moving?
For sure, there are opportunities. Outbound logistics, for example, is an area which offers tremendous scope for digital optimization. So if you have geotags of your delivery sites, then there's a lot of work that can be done, and we are doing it as well. On choice of vehicles, matching vehicles with routes, you know, and other efficiency metrics. On part load inbound milk run type pickups, again, there is a lot of opportunity for optimization. Where it becomes a lot more challenging is full truckload long haul. There, you know, everybody's using the biggest truck already. The 5-axle truck is what everybody is using. There are opportunities like shifting to rail. We've tried a lot of rail logistics, but it doesn't add up when you take the loading, unloading, and all of that. There's not much margin left. In fact, it ends up being more expensive. It works for us for certain commodities like flour, but it doesn't really work for products like vegetables or fruit as much as it does. So full truckload long haul, tough to optimize any further. If you're looking at milk run, partial truckload pickups, and outbound logistics, there's tremendous scope for optimization. There's another peculiar problem that we face. I'm sure Vasu will empathize with me a lot in this. We move our stuff in crates, especially fresh produce. And, you know, how do you handle reverse logistics? There's a big challenge over here. Both from our outbound sites, how do you pick up the crates on time? I think I found my crates in Jaipur Mandi. We are nowhere close to Jaipur. So these crates have a tendency to disappear, to get damaged, etc. Managing that reverse logistics around crates is non-trivial in our business, because often the value of the crate exceeds the value of the good in the crate as well. So that's some areas where we're doing some work, but yeah.
Ricken, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, I think echo what Karthik said. We work in the very local logistics space, just max 15 to 20 kilometer radius. So that totally is filling the less than truckload volumes of these trucks to optimize delivery. And as Karthik said, in that case, when you're doing like these proximate deliveries, you know, return traffic is not that much of a deal, but we actually do also use the reverse logistics from farm gate to Mandi and then return to deliver input orders for farmers. I think there's also a sort of opportunity, I would just say, you know, a lot of what we've heard, I feel like on this call has been a lot of like mostly like vertically integrated supply chains, right? Like that are like really tight and that are like supply, you know, consumers very well. But I think they're in this COVID situation, and especially with migrants going back to like the villages with tech savviness and smartphones, I think what we're seeing is like there's a greater degree of like entrepreneurialness amongst like the community members themselves to figure out how like they can optimize their truckloads, for instance, more efficiently than even we can do. So what we started to do actually is to kind of loosen the reins a little bit instead of trying to like maintain like a super tight regime. In some ways, it's actually better to kind of give more freedom to like these transporters and others in our sort of marketplace to be able to optimize, you know, and add more goods to their truckloads because they're savvy enough.
Okay, got it. One last question, and I think Pallavi, this is, you know, coming from your comments of Bindi being at 5 degrees C and moving to 40 degrees C. Can these chains bear the cost of cold chain here? And how are you seeing that kind of play out?
So I think scale will really help. Right now, cold chain is a very expensive process end to end. And so if you want to do it, then scale will really help. Otherwise, it will always be a very localized kind of a business. If you procure locally and quickly deliver it, um, that is one way. If you want to really get advantages of price differences across regions, then we can't do it if the scale is low. So that's our observation on cold chain right now. The other thing that has helped, like I mentioned, was tracking really well. So IoT devices or any other device which helps us with information on the temperatures, that really helps in in terms of maintaining the quality and then keeping our customers happy.
Okay, thank you.
And if I may add, I mean, investing in the right cold chain actually it turns out to be in the total cost of ownership turns out to be cheaper than I mean, you're procuring and then wasting a lot of that. So we have seen in our potato experience, if there is a absolutely good cold store with right humidity, temperature, and aeration. I mean, it may cost 2 or 3 times more in the beginning, but then it preserves the quality like almost 4 to 5 months more, even in case of potatoes. So I mean, so it's very important to invest in the right technology to get the shelf life which we want.
Got it. Raman, I'm going to hand back to you because I think we're at 5:35. There are a lot of questions here, but I think broadly they were around these topics. I perhaps have missed a couple here, but I think some of those were covered in terms of quality, etc., that we talked about here. Over to you, Raman.
Thanks, Ritu, and thanks everybody for an active participation. I think there are a lot of nuanced issues that are emerging and that obviously have not been addressed through this short 90-minute dialogue. We will obviously follow this up, including look at a more deeper consumer perspective on how that could get factored into building reliability in the supply chain. Look at the critical area of reverse logistics and wastages, because a lot of these things will start to become important as we go forward. I think consumers the next 3 to 5 years will be unforgiving on some of these wastages that will be visible. And I think investors also will start to look at what is the environmental impact of many of these agtech companies, and of course established players already have their investor platforms. So I think we'll have to look at some of those things and how digital tools are enabling these enterprises to deal with these issues. So thanks everybody. The recording of this Ag Clinic will be put on social media and will be sent to all of you, and feel free to share it with everybody. We will soon come back to you with our next couple of topics of Ag Clinic, and we look forward to a continued engagement. ThinkAg, as I mentioned at the beginning, is a not-for-profit platform, and we believe there is an opportunity for creating collaboration opportunities among ag-tech entrepreneurs and corporates, and hopefully at some point in time we get FPOs in the middle as well. They are the new emerging startups, I should say, or corporates, whichever way you want to look at them. But I think that's really the kind of triangle that we want to start to build as we go along over the next couple of years. And we look forward to your active support and collaboration. That. Thanks again for your time and for your patient engagement in today's Ag Clinic. Thanks, Abhijit, for being behind that ThinkAg logo and for managing the technical piece. And thanks everybody, all the participants, for your questions and patient hearing. Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a good day and good weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.